Well, hello, everybody. Happy 2026. Welcome to the Top Threats of 2026 webinar, a webinar by LMG Security. My name is Natalie Bray, and I'm your moderator for today. Before we start this program, I would like to give you some housekeeping information. First, we encourage attendees to use the computer audio feature of this webinar. During the program, should you experience any audio interference, such as static or intermittent audio due to a busy network, please use the optional phone connection, which is listed in the audio tab of the webinar interface. Second, we will be having a question and answer session at the end of the program. You may submit questions anytime by using the Q&A tab in the webinar interface or save them until the end. Next, the video of the webinar and any handouts will be available after the event. All attendees will receive a notification once the video is live. Please feel free to download any files that are included for your reference later on. And last but certainly not least, a survey will be available to you at the conclusion of this webinar. Please take the opportunity to provide feedback on today's webinar experience. Our presenters for the webinar today are Sherri Davidoff and Matt Durrin. Sherri Davidoff is the founder of LMG Security and the author of 3 books, including Data Breaches, Crisis, and Opportunity. She is a certified penetration tester and forensic analyst and a graduate of MIT. Sherri has been called a security badass by the New York Times. Matt Durrin is the director of training and research at LMG Security and a Black Hat USA instructor. He holds his computer science degree from the University of Montana, and his malware research has been featured on NBC Nightly News. Sherri and Matt are also co-authors of the book Ransomware and Cybercrime. Sherri and Matt, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, and welcome everybody. A great way to kick off the year. So by the way, check out our podcast if you get a chance. We've been running a podcast called Cyberside Chats all year. This is one of our recent episodes. We covered redaction and AI through the Epstein files. So check it out, chatcyberside.com, or what is it, Matt, we say, wherever podcasts are sold. It's free.
Wherever your favorite podcasts are sold.
Yes, very nice. Okay, so today we're going to talk about our top threats, and spoiler alert, they are AI visibility, control, and usage, identity and trust exploitation, supply chain, of course, and embedded trust failures, and then ransomware and operational extortion. And it's not just ransomware. This is different than in past years. In fact, not just ransomware, but all of these threats are being accelerated by AI. And one thing I think that's different than in past years, like Matt, you and I were chatting about when like cryptojacking was our #1 top threat. And that was like a very specific threat that occurred for like 2 or 3 years. Today, we can divide the top threats of 2026 into buckets. #1, AI visibility and control, identity exploitation, supply chain failures, which of course are happening more and more, and finally, AI-enabled ransomware. So let's jump in and start by talking about AI visibility and control. This is, I think, my favorite image in the entire presentation, Matt. And I'm pointing at you because I believe you are the artiste. Is that correct?
Well, sort of. We were doing a presentation that was heavy into AI usage, so I figured what better way to make the graphics for it than to use AI to make those graphics. And so I had a lot of fun putting all these together. It's amazing, though, when you look at this image versus what we had, like a year or 2 ago with AI-generated images. Oh, yeah, that one right there. It's kind of painful to look at. I mean,
Actually, AI has come a long way, and now
yeah.
AI and ransomware are friends. All of this, by the way, is worlds better than 2024. Let us not speak of the images in 2024. Oh, God!
My images from 2024
No,
were outstanding. Thank you
that
very
is the
much. Every hacker has tons of pizzas on their desk, and they usually have a giant pencil. That's what AI thought at that point.
in big gold coins. Oh my God, that's the worst image ever. But we're starting to see real AI risks and AI threats occurring. One of the biggest ones of 2025 was Echo Leak. Matt, why don't you jump in and fill us in on Echo Leak?
Of course, yeah. Echo Leak was a really interesting vulnerability, and the reason it was so interesting was because it was what we call a zero-click vulnerability. What we mean by that is when a user is hit with the exploit that actually makes this function, they don't really need to interact with everything. When we think about things like phishing emails, or specifically malware delivered via phishing emails, there's usually a point in the attack chain where the user has to either click on a link, download a file, open a document, or something like that. When we look at the Echo Leak vulnerability specifically, none of those things need to happen. And this was a set of researchers who discovered this. Luckily, I don't think we've actually seen this exploited in the wild.
Microsoft patched it. This was a huge blind spot, though, I think. And I was just mentioning it to an audience the other day because it's shocking to people to understand that you could send an email to someone, and Copilot would ingest it and then serve those results to other people in the organization, even if the user had never read that email. I mean, what an obvious backdoor in hindsight, right?
Yeah, and it really goes down to that level of AI control and access that I think we've been kind of hammering on for the last since AI came out realistically. But yeah, this one was interesting. An attacker could craft an email and they could put basically prompts for ChatGPT or I'm sorry, Copilot into the actual coding of the email itself. Now, the user, even if they open the email, wouldn't see these things. They're just in the metadata for the email itself. But because Copilot ingests everything that the user has access to, unless it's configured otherwise, it now brings those prompts in. And so later on down the road, it could be basically triggered to start exfiltrating data, giving bad advice to people. You could basically adjust any parameters with Copilot that you wanted to based on the prompts that you were feeding through these poisoned emails. And again, no click required. All you had to do was send the email to someone, and as long as they received it and Copilot had access, it would ingest those malicious commands.
I think we're going to start to see this more and more because the big question is, where is AI getting all of its information? We
Right.
want to turn it loose. We want it to make decisions for us. There's businesses that are replacing whole jobs with AI. And this question is only going to become increasingly important. Another thing you pointed out is that AI incidents often don't generate alerts, especially in this case.
Yeah, that's a tough one to follow too. When we talk about AI being misused inside of an organization, oftentimes this is going to look a lot like just normal workflow for what you would expect to see from people that are using the system as it's intended to be used. It'll look like things like productivity software, collaboration software. I mean, the realistic thing here is that it looks, for the naked eye anyway, normal, unless you have some very, very tight analytics that are going through your log files basically on a line by line basis, usually using AI itself. There's a really good chance that
Yeah.
you might miss something like this. So traditionally, we'd see things like data loss prevention step in here. We would see something like identity and access management controls. But again, because AI has access to everything that the user has access to, unless it's configured otherwise, there might not be an alert. There might not be an IOC to track. And there's not really an incident until you find out that your data's out the door, which is a rough place to find yourself.
By the way, whoever created this image needs to be arrested.
That was me, so
Just
careful.
saying. Well, you and ChatGPT, but yes. So yeah, to your point, I mean, this was possible because Copilot has legitimate access to your email, to your files, to your calendars, and its job is to synthesize information and serve it up. And unbeknownst to a lot of people, it was serving it up to others within the organization. They did patch this. They actually patched Echo Leak before the researchers released their information. But it just makes you wonder what's coming down the pipeline for 2026 and what other AI providers have issues that are similar, which they haven't maybe yet thought about.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know what we don't know.
Yes. So to go over our top threat of 2026, the issue, of course, is that AI is no longer a standalone tool. It is integrated into our workflows, into our processes, into our environments, and security teams often lack that visibility. So we may not know, what can AI access, how is it used, what data flows into it or out of it, and if there's a problem, you may not get any alert. Microsoft recently came out with their Digital Defense Report of 2025, and they do a really great job of visualizing some of the challenges that we have. So in this case, they're visualizing the new AI attack surfaces. We have our traditional threat vectors on the bottom, and then here on the top, we have those new AI attack surfaces. And specifically, we were just talking about generative AI prompts and responses, and how does information get processed. Here's another image from Microsoft's Digital Defense Report. I like how they've broken down AI risks into these different layers. So at the bottom layer, that foundation, we see AI platform security. Can someone poison training data? How do you know you can trust what you get out of it? How about the model theft and the model poisoning? Can we trust the way the AI is? Can we trust the way the AI is reasoning? And then on the next level, we have AI application security. Are there insecure plugins? Is it possible to leak data? If you recall, early in ChatGPT's development, you could write poem, poem, poem a bunch of times, and it would spit out training data that no one was supposed to see. And these days, we're seeing a ton of prompt injection attacks as well. It's interesting because LMG does web application penetration testing. And so we've seen this year how many web apps that we've already tested in the past now have AI integrated. And that means there's a whole new class of attacks that our penetration testers can launch. And we're seeing all kinds of new findings on reports. Again, even for web applications that have already been through testing year after year after year. And then finally, there's AI usage security, sensitive information disclosure, shadow IT. Raise your hand if you have shadow IT. Okay, well, this is kind of a trick question. I mean, it's really just a form of exercise. Every organization has shadow IT or fractional shadow IT. And in the case of AI, it's especially challenging because people will just go to their personal ChatGPT instances and type in questions that relate to work. So we really need to engage people, make them aware of the risks, and try to centralize as much as possible. But it's a special challenge when AI agents are everywhere. AI is now embedded in productivity platforms, collaboration tools. Sometimes it's enabled by default and you can't even stop it. Even Slack just came out with a new Slack AI bot. And then Matt, you pointed me towards this article about AI proxies. Do you want to share a little information?
Yeah, so these have become very common. It's similar to the last slide that you just put up there. I mean, these AI integrations are popping up everywhere, and a lot of organizations, especially productivity application developers, are integrating what we call agentic AI capabilities. And these are things like adding Copilot directly to Microsoft Excel or something like that, or Zoom having its own AI, translation or transcription assistant that automatically pops up and analyzes your Zoom calls, creates the transcript, and then gives you basically cliff notes for the call that you were just on. These things can be really useful, but they can also pop up in ways that we don't want them to. And so knowing when AI is integrating into your applications and knowing what that implication actually is becomes really, really important. If I'm working on something like a client report that has very, very sensitive data in it, I need to know that if Copilot is parsing that data as I'm creating that report, that it's staying in-house and it's staying secure. If I'm on a call with someone and we're discussing a sensitive topic on Zoom or GoToWebinar or really any other kind of conference platform, I need to know that the AI is not sending that data off to a foreign server for analysis or something along those lines. So again, just understanding where these new proxies are popping up because they do act on your behalf. I mean, they again inherit your permissions and do the things that you could normally do. If we're not familiar with exactly what that means, then we can find ourselves in kind of a tough spot. And we want these things to make our lives easier, not more difficult.
Well, just from a third party risk management perspective or a compliance perspective, I think you have all kinds of new challenges because maybe your AI tool is grabbing information or grabbing audio files or things like that. We sometimes see little plugins, for example, audio transcription. Maybe that's done by a vendor in a faraway country and you might not even realize that. So, this is creating some new challenges for that third party vendor risk. In Microsoft's article, they talked about how Copilot is now integrated with a checkout process. So, for example, if you're in Copilot and you mention a product and it's eligible to buy, meaning they've partnered with a vendor that they can use to sell it through Copilot, a buy button will pop up. And so now you may have credit card information potentially going through a system that is in part processed by AI. So, again, from a security risk and compliance perspective, I think data is going new places, and we need to understand that in order to secure it.
Yeah.
So I think I would say our number one biggest challenge of 2026 is going to be visibility. And correct me if you feel otherwise, Matt. I think that happens. That's the case with all of our top threats. Everything from AI to identity to supply chain risk management. So think about whether in your organization you can answer these questions. What AI tools are in use in your organization? Which AI features do you have enabled? Are users just turning things on willy-nilly, or is someone requesting to IT and IT is like, yeah, sure, that sounds fine? What users are interacting with different AI tools? And a big one, what data sources can AI access? And I think that was the big surprise with the Copilot Echo Leak case. People didn't realize that AI was using email as a data source. That's in many ways an untrusted data source. So we really need to think about it and hope that our vendors are thinking about it as well. So what can we do here, Matt?
Well, there's a few things that we need to do. It's not what we can, it's what we have to. The first thing we need to do, and this goes along with the questions you just asked, is inventory. So make sure that we know which AI agents, which AI features, and which applications are being used across our enterprise. This can be integrating or integration into SaaS applications. It can be local applications. Regardless, we need to know where exactly this is interacting with our data and our users. And then secondly, we need to be able to monitor that usage. If AI is gaining access to sensitive information that it shouldn't be, that needs to be stemmed. If it is coming up with strange answers to user prompts, if it's giving incorrect information, that needs to be understood. And your users need to understand that too. AI is not infallible. It's a tool that we use, and it can make mistakes. In fact, we see that fairly frequently. And then next, we need to classify. And this is kind of the name of the game when it comes down to securely integrating AI into your organization. Data sensitivity labels, especially in something like SharePoint, if you're storing sensitive information there, need to be set up and configured appropriately so that AI can't just access everything that is in your SharePoint instance. Otherwise, it could be gaining access to things like human resource data, sensitive company data, proprietary coding information, or something like that. If you wanted to have access to that data, great, you can set it up that way. But if you don't, you need to put up those roadblocks so AI doesn't just have carte blanche access to everything.
Well, and I think this is why having a data classification policy is so important, especially in 2026. It's funny, I think many of us have built even incident response programs, whole security programs without classifying data or understanding what we have. So now is the time to make sure you have a data classification policy. It's usually really simple, 3 to 5 categories. If you don't, feel free to drop us a line. I'm happy to send a free template, data classification template. They're really easy to modify or create. And if you do have one, take a look at it, review it, make sure it's relevant in your organization today. But inventory, monitoring, classifying your AI usage, all of that depends on one big underlying thing, which is making sure you've centralized your AI usage. So that's why I put centralize in the title there, because if you haven't centralized your AI usage, it's really hard to get your arms around it. So fundamentally, we need to make sure users are talking to like IT centrally, for example, before deploying AI tools. And when a new tool is procured, you're understanding what that AI usage is. Okay, the next big takeaway is restricting and governing AI usage. So again, require that centralized approval for new AI integrations, aligning the permissions and the data handling with your data sensitivity, restricting AI usage for any super confidential or regulated data sets. And finally, make sure you're training your users, because in many ways, they're going to be the gatekeepers. It always takes a while for technology to catch up with security needs. And so there are going to be times when your users are the only thing ensuring, making sure that AI is properly accessing information and it's not being used in a risky way. When it comes to people, we've said for decades now, make sure to employ the principle of least privilege. What does that mean? Well, it's on a need to know basis. And if a person does not need access to information, limit it. Because it's not just about how much you trust that person, but could their account credentials be misused? If they are, what's the blast radius of a cyber incident? We need to treat artificial intelligence in many ways the same way we treat real intelligence or human intelligence. You want to vet your AI tools, and you also want to configure them to use the principle of least privilege. If they don't need access to certain information, or if you can anonymize or de-identify information, then do it. Make sure that you're only giving AI tools access to what they actually need to do their jobs. All right, AI gateways. Matt, why don't you dig into this one? I think this is an exciting new area where we're seeing some emerging technology.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one too. And as you mentioned before, principle of least privilege and zero trust principles being applied to AI the same way that they'd be applied to a user or any other device is kind of the name of the game when it comes to the more human elements of the usage of these systems. But there are technical solutions to these things as well, and using them in tandem seems to be about the best solution that we have right now. So an AI gateway basically acts as a almost like a firewall in between your users and the large language models or generative AI or whatever other tools they're using. This is basically like, an API gateway plus data loss prevention plus identity policy, but it's for use of AI specifically. And this is going to look at things like the prompts that users are sending to the AI model. This can help protect against things like prompt injection, which is a big problem when we talk about leaking training data or other sensitive information. It also looks at the responses that are coming back. So if there's something coming back that is inappropriate, malicious, or something like that, an AI gateway can catch that so it doesn't actually get back to your users. And then it also keeps them from accessing models they're not supposed supposed to be accessing on controlled hardware. If you have users who are trying to log in and submit data to like DeepSeek or something like that, you can use an AI proxy to stop their access to that system specifically, which
Or
you
just block
probably should.
DeepSeek.
Yeah,
But a
yeah.
lot of it is if you want to give them access to ChatGPT or Copilot, you may not want them to put certain types of sensitive information in there.
Right.
And that's where an AI gateway can come into play, making sure you're filtering information out, that you're actually controlling what gets put into AI, and you're logging. You have that visibility you need. I really like this graphic. There's many AI gateway companies that are coming out with new products. Again, this is an area of emerging technology. This is a screenshot from True Foundry where they visualize how the LLM gateway works and how it helps to filter information and control usage. So check it out. All right, with that, that is our first top threat of 2026. Our key takeaways here are that AI adoption will continue to accelerate, so be prepared for that. And there's always going to be a lag in governance and in technology products to help control that. So that's where training users comes in, awareness comes in, and we just all kind of need to step up and fill that gap. Right now is the time to centralize your AI usage. That should be a big goal for 2026. Get your arms around it. Make sure everybody knows if you're going to use a new AI tool, there should be a centralized process for approving that. Make sure you're understanding any new AI related features, even in software platforms you already use, and that you've got it baked into your vendor vetting processes. And then after you centralize, gain visibility into how AI tools are used. Consider technical solutions to support that. Make sure you're restricting and governing your AI usage. And again, leverage that principle of least privilege. So back in December, there was 1 week where there were actually 2 different alerts from AWS. One of them was a notification from Amazon's threat intelligence that said a Russian cyber threat group had actually been breaking into perimeter systems located in AWS for years, and then using those essentially as pivot points to target Western critical infrastructure. So basically, they were trying to piggyback off of AWS's trusted infrastructure in order to launch their attacks. And then the second one that came out the same week was about how Amazon actually hired a North Korean infiltrator. And they're not alone, of course. This has been a trend all year. I don't know if you guys remember this past summer, when Christina Chapman, a U.S. citizen, was actually sentenced after being charged because she helped North Korean workers worm their way into legitimate U.S. organizations. I think it was about 100 different organizations that found they had been hacked this summer by North Korean workers. And there were actually multiple people found within the United States to have assisted with this. So this is a screenshot of her laptop farm. After companies hired these workers, they would ship the laptop to Christina Chapman, and then the workers would remote in from there, and it would look like they were coming from a US-based IP address. So she just had them all lined up on racks. Kind of amazing. And then if they needed to send things, they sent like physically, they mailed them to a US-based address in Arizona, or, for some of the other ones, it was just other states around the country. But the common thread of many of these stories was that they were exploiting identity, trust that already existed. Attackers are stealing identities to gain access, to expand access. So historically, it's been password theft. Okay, we have some standard ways to protect against it. We're not always great at doing it, but we can. Now they're stealing API keys, session tokens, certificates, so that even after you reset a password, they're still trusted. And they're exploiting weaknesses in your human identity verification processes as well. So these can be very difficult to detect. That's why they're doing it. And frankly, our traditional responses might not work. This is an area where we need to adapt. All right, so when we talk about identity, I feel like this is a word that gets used all the time, and it feels it's kind of like cloud. It's actually kind of nebulous. Matt, why don't we dig in and just briefly cover what do we mean when we talk about identity?
Yeah, when we talk about identity in an enterprise workforce, I mean, we're not just talking about things like your username and password, although those are components behind, verifying your identity inside of those environments. Really, what we're talking about here is anything that you or the devices or software that you're using utilizes to basically get the okay to perform work and access data inside of the network. So this can be all kinds of different things. Obviously, we said user accounts already, and that can be you, it can be a contractor, it can be a service account. But we can also look at other authentication factors that we have involved, like your MFA. We can look at authorizations because remember, computers have to authenticate without you sometimes, and so they need things like passkeys or certificates or things like that. OAuth tokens have been a huge target for theft, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. Mainly because they get you those keys to enter into applications without actually needing those usernames, passwords, or MFA. And then again, there's those trust relationships that we build inside of networks as we set up how computers actually talk to each other. So yeah, Sherri, if you want to jump to the next one, we want to talk a little bit about how identity is not just for you; it's also for all the things that you use. And this is where the concept of a machine identity comes into play. And when we look at the numbers behind it, I believe this one comes from CyberArk. They are talking about how many more machine identities exist inside your environment rather than actual humans. And it's a ratio of about 82 to 1. So for every one employee you have, there's about 82 different computers or applications that are also going through this identity process. Hackers know this, and they can go after those as well. Sherri, you're muted.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is another chart from Microsoft's Digital Defense Report. And you and I were both talking about this again this morning, that 4 of the top ways that attackers are getting in are identity related.
Right. Yeah, and that's not strange when we look at the overall cybersecurity landscape. I mean, identity is a security perimeter for most organizations out there. And when we look at the actual statistics behind it, and you can see them on the screen here, valid accounts, username and password. Social engineering, what are they usually going after? Username, password, session cookie. Remote services, your remote desktop credentials, and then phishing, which again goes after your username and password. So attackers are going for this. I mean, it's way easier to break into a network if you can just log in than it is to execute some kind of massive vulnerability exploit or something along those lines. And remember, attackers are going for bang for their buck. They're looking for high volume of victims, and well, people are bad with passwords and authentication in general. So this is where they target a lot of the time.
I think it's interesting, B, exploiting public-facing applications. And actually, A is non-identified. So really,
Yeah.
the top way that we know of that hackers are breaking in is exploiting public-facing applications. And what we saw recently with FortiCloud is that was being leveraged as the initial foothold, and then they were leveraging identity to take those next steps. The same
Right.
thing. Well, here, I'll let you walk through it, and then maybe we can talk about how we've seen this in the past as well.
Yeah, the FortiCloud vulnerability. So this hit people all over the planet, which was really interesting to see. And yeah, this was a pretty straightforward kind of exploit. So FortiCloud's single sign-on system, the system that actually integrates with your identity provider and gives you access to those systems using centralized credentials, had a bug. Attackers were able to remotely execute code. They were able to sign in and create their own admin accounts on these devices. And by doing that, they were able to basically bypass all of the other identity controls that were in place because now they had a valid user account on the Forti device. And because it's an admin account, they get access to pretty much everything. And this leads to a lot of different potential problems. They could scrape passwords of the other users. They could move laterally off of that device into other things on the network. And again, this was a worldwide issue. Now, when we look at the overall distribution, you can see the U.S. was by far the biggest target for this. Over 5,400 devices here inside the United States that were identified at the time of this article. My guess is that there's probably more. We see Canada on that list. And then I had to throw this in there because I honestly could not figure out which island this was. But if you look down in the lower left, there were 3 devices on some island out in the middle of the South Pacific that were also vulnerable. So I don't know what's going on down there, but they need to patch their systems. So what does this actually mean? Like when we talk about the identity angle of coming into these Forti devices and what the problem was, well, it meant that you had a linked identity system, something that was integrated in with the rest of your management systems that was vulnerable to a bypass. And once inside, the attackers could skip that whole external authentication part. They didn't need to target anything on the outside anymore because they had their own legitimate credentials to log in. And this means that they could basically have free reign inside those systems. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it would, unless you knew that the account was brand new, this would look a lot like standard workflow inside of that device. And so it's very difficult to spot that an attacker has actually made their way into the system. It makes it even more difficult to fully get them out because you may not know all of the accounts that are associated with a heavily used firewall, or if you have a large admin team that works on them, it's going to take some time for you to figure out what's supposed to be there and what's not. So where does identity actually matter inside of your network? And I wanted to throw this slide in there because a lot of people don't really understand exactly where you have to verify on a daily basis to ensure security of both your network and the data that you're working with. So we have our basic identity providers. So on-premise, Active Directory, how you log into Windows, basically. This is the old school identity and access management system that a lot of organizations still rely on, and it is kind of the cornerstone. It's where a lot of this verification comes from. But we also have cloud services that have made their way in. So when we look at Duo and their single sign-on systems, or Okta, or Google, or the Entra ID through Microsoft system, all of these rely again on that identity. We also have things like SaaS applications, which we'll talk about silos here in a minute, but that is where we start to potentially lose control over usernames and passwords. That can be a big problem from a management standpoint. APIs, obviously, those are the way applications connect and exchange information. Browser extensions, which most people don't even think about. And then, of course, we have those embedded AI tools that do end up creating and managing a lot of that identity on the back end for us without us even realizing it, which is a little bit of a strange situation to find yourselves in.
So basically everywhere.
Yeah, it's literally in everything. If you go to booking.com, they have integrated ChatGPT, which will give you like tour instructions for whatever city you're going to visit, if you can believe what it's telling you. We've seen some horror stories based on that. But I mentioned before with things like SaaS applications, we end up running into a problem. And this is the concept of what we call an identity silo. Now, ideally, your IT and security staff is going to have control and governance over pretty much anything identity related inside of your network. If you need to sign on and access something, IT and security should be the ones that are providing you with that access and making sure that you don't have too broad of permissions, that you have enough to actually function properly, and that there's not a door hanging open. But there is a risk here, and a lot of this has come from our move into cloud applications as kind of a baseline for most of our networks. If we are relying on a third party that doesn't integrate directly with our systems to manage those identities for us, it becomes a little bit different. And so you can see some of the big ones that are on the list here. And again, this comes out of CyberArk, excuse me, their identity report for 2025. Hybrid IT infrastructure. So when you're shifting between your on-premise computer and your cloud systems, make up a big part of this identity silo system. And then we have shadow IT. If people are installing applications or using services that are not approved and are not managed by your IT and security staff, that means they're basically handling all of this on their own, and that can be a big red flag. You can also see reliance on other people's identity stacks and more. I don't need to read the entire chart off to you, obviously. You can see what it is. But realistically, what it comes down to is that lack of centralized control. If we don't have control over these elements, then they become potential weak points in our security architecture that other malicious actors out there could leverage and can take advantage of.
This was interesting. So Microsoft, this is attacks, by the way. This is a chart produced by Microsoft about identity-related attacks, not successful attacks. And what they found is more than 97% of identity attacks are password spray or brute force attacks. Why? Because they're easy and sometimes they work, right?
Right.
At the same time, honestly, the thing that intrigued me most about this is number 2 is token theft by malware. And even though that's a tiny number, token theft is extremely powerful. And often we see that once you figure out that an adversary is in your organization, password changes happen pretty quickly. Often people forget to change session tokens. Matt, do you want to explain what a session token is, and then maybe we can walk through this epidemic that we've been seeing?
Yeah, I'd love to. So when you do something like sign into your email through a web browser, it creates a session token for you. And this is basically just a piece of information that you can use to prove to whatever service you're using that you've already authenticated and you don't need to sign in again. So if I sign into Gmail or if I sign into Microsoft 365 and I close my browser, I can reopen my browser and go back to that email system without having to enter my username, enter my password, go through MFA, and basically take the time it takes to log in. This is great when it comes to overall productivity. It saves me a lot of time. It saves a lot of hassle. We don't have people angrily calling the help desk because they can't remember their password all the time. I mean, there are huge benefits to setting it up this way. But if an attacker is able to get their hands on that piece of data, the piece that says you are good to go and can log in whenever you want to, they can pretend to be you and they can log in without needing your username, your password, or your MFA. And this is where we see a lot of attacks against email systems taking place. Once they have that information, even if a password is changed, they can likely still access that content. And it becomes really difficult to, unless you reset their session, really difficult to actually lock them out. It's why when we talk about initial steps for something like an email compromise, sure, password resets are great. But You also need to go in and do an MFA reset and a session reset. Make sure no new devices have been added that can act as a multi-factor device, and make sure that anyone who's currently logged into that account gets booted and has to fully sign back on using MFA before they're able to access any of those contents. Yeah, again, it's part of the checklist when we talk about general incident response, and it's one that gets missed in a lot of cases, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and we just had a meeting of the Net Diligence Ransomware Advisory Board yesterday, and this is just one of those epidemics where hackers are repeatedly just stealing those session tokens. So watch out for this in your organization because they're looking for more than just passwords at this point. Okay, and the reason they matter is because they last a long time. Once they're logged in, they can keep reusing those. They will work later. Sometimes we see credentials embedded in code, so we're going to actually cover a case study here in a few minutes, the SalesLoft Drift case study, where we saw credentials embedded in code that were then used to hack into over 22 different major companies, including security companies. So it's really, in a lot of ways, being used as kind of a backdoor that people aren't protecting against well enough. Also, Matt, you brought this up the other day. AI systems often act on behalf of their users, using their identity, using their permissions. And so that's where these two threats are intersecting. I'll let you take it away, and then we can also cover the CoFish story as well, and your amazing graphic for that.
CoFish is one of my favorites, but we'll get to that here in a minute. Yeah, as you were just saying, I mean, there is a relationship between identity and artificial intelligence. And again, it just comes down to that integration piece. If I'm using a built-in AI agent and it's integrating in with my environment, it has to authenticate with that environment in some way or another to be able to access the things I need it to access. And usually it's using that, or it's doing that using my identity. Now, it's not using my username and password or anything like that. Again, this is using either an API key or a session token or something similar to it. But it is accessing things that I probably don't even realize I have access to inside of networks. And this is one of the problems that we see with Copilot in a lot of cases. I mean, it can surface things that somebody might not even know is sensitive or that they have access to in the first place. And when we get into situations like that, we end up with unintentional data leakage. We end up with breaches of confidentiality of data, and it just becomes a big mess to deal with. And one of the big ways I like to describe this is using the CoFish attack scenario. And I thought this was really interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it is absolutely identity abuse because it is going after your OAuth tokens, your session tokens that allow you to access things like Microsoft Office 365. But it's doing it in kind of and not to give too much credit to the hackers here, but kind of an ingenious way. So there is a system called Microsoft Copilot Studio. And that allows people to go in and basically create these agentic AI applications that can then integrate with other software that you're using. What the attackers would do in this case is create a malicious Copilot agent, but inside of that studio. They would then target people with phishing attacks. But what makes this different from a standard phishing attack, and one of the big tips that we give people to avoid phishing, is look at the URL that you're clicking on. If it looks strange, then don't click on it. Well, in this case, this is actually coming from Microsoft.com, and you can see it in the example we have on the screen here. This is copilotstudio.microsoft.com, exactly where you would be going to interact with any other valid application that was sitting there. And if you look at it, it says, to continue, please log in. And they have a little agent set up that allows you to log into your Microsoft account inside the studio. Here's where people end up getting phished. They would put in their username and password. It would prompt for MFA because it's supposed to. But once they put in that MFA and they hit OK on it, that session token was then redirected back out to the attacker at this point. And we said before, once they have that OAuth token, they don't need any of the other information you just provided to log into the account. Again, what makes this even more insidious is this is not necessarily a technical point of failure. This isn't something that Microsoft's system is doing wrong. It's designed to function this way because that's how those agents actually end up working. And if it didn't work that way, then they wouldn't be able to have the studio in the first place. So not a bug, it's a feature, as we like to say. But it means that there are other things that you need to be aware of and other ways that attackers are getting access to this information.
Oh, yeah, I loved your point there. It's working as intended.
Working as intended, yeah.
Yeah.
So what could I do? So let's just take this from a practical standpoint. If I hit you with one of these phishing attacks and I steal your session token through Copilot, what can I actually do? Like, what benefit does that bring to me as the hacker? Well, as it turns out, it's a pretty big benefit. I get access to pretty much anything you have access to inside of Microsoft 365. And again, I can do this without needing to know your password. I can read your inbox. I can send messages as you. And then I can access files that you have stored in things like OneDrive or SharePoint. So if you have access to sensitive data, now I have access to that sensitive data. And on the back end, through the workflow or from the workflow perspective, this is going to look a lot like normal user activity because again, I'm using your authenticated session token. Somebody's already logged in as you. They've gone through all the hurdles. They've gone through MFA. They've gone through approved device, everything else. But they are acting in a somewhat malicious way. And unless people are paying really close attention to what that behavior looks like, this can really easily get missed by automated security tools.
Okay, so how can you protect against this? I mean, I think if you can protect against the Copilot phishing, oh, here's Matt's amazing graphic, by the way.
Because the Copilot is a fish, get it?
Oh my God. It's really you're protecting more broadly against consent phishing attacks.
Yeah, so this really does speak to a broader kind of cyber attack, not just Copilot. But and we've seen these for years. People trying to get applications, as authorized to access your Microsoft 365 data or your Google Workspace data or really anything else. But the big things here are pretty straightforward. First off, we need to restrict what we can allow our users to grant this consent to. Out of the box, Microsoft 365 will let your users basically authorize any application that they want to, or somewhat close to that. But it means that if you're not watching, they could add in an application, even something that's from the Microsoft Store that you just might not want on the network. We also need to make sure that we are looking at permissions and removing apps that are not being used. Things that sit for a really long time have the potential to be compromised on the back end. We see this with open source repositories really frequently and browser extensions, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But we also need to make sure that we are monitoring for those events, not just the logins. And we need to treat these tokens as high risk. They are as high risk as usernames and passwords. They are just as valuable to a hacker, and in a lot of cases, they're just as easy to steal. So it comes down to the basics. But if we can get these things knocked out, we remove the ability for these attacks to have at least as big or as frequent of an impact on our organization as we're seeing right now.
Yeah, good tips, Matt. Thanks so much. Oh my gosh, another identity related threat is browser extensions. And it also, dovetails, of course, with just software issues in general. But yeah, I think this is one of the scariest ones that we talked about on Cyber Site Chats this year. And I'm sure we're going to see it more next year. Do you want to go through this? This really rose to our attention in early December, I know, when it was discovered that some browser extensions that had been created by likely Chinese nation state actors had kind of suddenly gotten activated. So for a long time, they were benign, and then boom, they started engaging in malicious activity after they had been installed on hundreds of thousands of users' systems.
Yeah, this is a scary one, and it's because a lot of these are open source, and so there is, when it comes down to things that come out of like the Chrome store, as an example. I mean, you can get an extension published in the Chrome store without a ton of verification as to who you actually are. And something that integrates directly with your web browser, especially if you use a lot of cloud applications, can potentially be a huge conduit for data theft or credential leakage or anything else like that, just based on the fact that it's part of the browser you're using to access those systems. One of the big ones we saw, and this was back in December, we saw the Shady Panda campaign, which is the one you were talking about, Sherri. It was a browser extension that had been on the market for a while and was in reality an actual functional browser extension, but it had gained enough of a footprint that the developers behind it decided to activate some hidden code and push an update out that then made it into an information stealer. And what really scares IT professionals about this is when you have something like a browser extension, oftentimes those update automatically outside of the control of your standard software security practices. Chrome itself, like when we look at the systems that we use here as an example, Chrome itself comes down to a notified upgrade. So I can get it through our self-service system. IT controls when those updates can go out or when they're required. But if I'm looking at the extensions that I have on the browser, unless those are very tightly controlled, those can update outside of that process. And that's where we saw this really taking place. This also happens with older projects, which a lot of people have oftentimes installed into their browser and then kind of forgotten about. If that developer's account gets hijacked or taken over, that can then be turned into something malicious way, way, way after the fact. In fact, years ago, I had a color picker add-on on Google Chrome that I used to match RGB colors when I was looking at news articles and things like that. And I'd completely forgotten it existed, and I deleted it from my primary computers, but I opened up an old laptop that had an old version of Chrome on it. That was still there, and it immediately got flagged by my antivirus software because someone had taken that developer's account over and had created a malicious insert for it that was automatically attempting to update and run. So here's why this matters. Browsers are a primary area for your users and your general user base to work from, because SaaS is basically everything. Everything software as a service, everything's in the cloud. If you have an extension that turns malicious, it can do things like access those session tokens or those cookies that are in the browser. It can hijack your ability to log into a system. It can hijack your OAuth flows. It can hijack corporate portals. It can keylog. I mean, there's a lot. And the fact that they update silently and outside of your control in a lot of cases means that if one of them gets taken over, it can automatically become a threat way before you're aware of something being a problem in the first place. This is also where we want to talk about trust inheritance. And we'll get into this when we talk about supply chain a little bit more, but I want to kind of prime you on what we mean by this. When we are looking at the inheritance of trust across maps, again, this comes down to your identity and how it's used throughout your organization. If I have identity systems that allow me to trust a SaaS application, that can be hijacked by a browser extension, which can then hijack those applications for me. So we want to look at those authorized channels, those standard workflows that we would normally not really be looking that closely into because they're fairly standard. But we want to take a closer look and make sure that we're not being exploited using those trusted channels and those trusted identities. Becomes a little bit difficult of a thing to do, especially if you don't have the infrastructure and the logging set up for it. But anymore, it's becoming a way more common access vector to go through something like a third party.
Yeah, so what can you do about this? First of all, make sure you're taking an inventory. I feel like we're starting to sound like a broken record. Inventory, get visibility, but it's true. And when we get to the end of this presentation, we'll see that again in all these areas, AI, identity, vendor vetting, it's all about first understanding what you have. So inventory, your OAuth apps, your scopes, your tokens, understand where they're used. Understand where you have extensions that are allowed in managed browsers, or if you have BYOD in your environment, you may really need to think about how you rein that in or educate people. Reduce the duration of trust in order to reduce the blast radius. So how long are those session tokens good for? A year, a month, a day? Understand how long they can be used if they are stolen. It's kind of like a hall pass, how long is that good for? Just today? And then make trust observable. Make sure you get alerts on new OAuth grants, monitor unusual API patterns. One thing that came up in our industry conversation yesterday was if somebody registers MFA on a new device, like an adversary that's tricked the help desk into registering their device, are you going to get an alert on that from the old device? So again, make sure you're seeing when there are new or unexpected usages of an identity. Matt, anything I missed that you want to highlight?
No, not really. What I would point out with that last point you made, though, about getting a notification about new MFA devices, if you're using Duo or Okta, that's a built-in feature. If you're using Entra ID, you can do that, but there's a few extra steps that you have to go through. You have to pipe your logs into an analytics workspace and then look for very specific events. But it's really important that you have visibility into that, because one of the big trends that we see is attackers registering their own MFA devices. And a lot of times they do that just by hijacking a service desk member or someone like that. I mean, it's how we saw like MGM get hacked.
That help desk scam, it's funny. I asked again on our call with industry incident responders, I was like, is there anyone else really being widely targeted other than help desks in scams like this? And it was like crickets. So be real careful about those user MFA resets and user password resets. Your help desk is definitely under fire. All right. Our third area that we wanted to talk about is supply chain risk. If it feels like there have been more and more widespread outages or supply chain ripple effects, you're not alone in having that feeling. We have more dependencies than ever. I can't wait to jump into the Salesloft Drift breach, because I think that's a great example where Salesforce is a third-party system and then Drift is this plugin to it that often we don't really think about. So we're going to get into that. But attackers are deliberately trying to get the most bang for their buck. So if they can attack a supplier or a piece of software that's used by a supplier and get a broader, get 22 companies instead of one, they're going to do that. And so that's part of why we're seeing more of these. They're getting better and better at taking that approach. So with that, Matt, you want to run through Salesloft Drift?
Yeah, let's do that. This is a great example too. Excuse me.
Of so many things, honestly.
Yeah, right. So when we and I think if you've watched our podcast, we've talked a little bit about this on the podcast as well. But this was a pretty big loss of customer data because of a what would you call it, a fourth party application or something like that?
It was in the headlines as Salesforce hack, but it wasn't. And then Salesforce is very quick to say, whoa, 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 we
Yeah.
weren't hacked. SalesLoft is a company that makes a plugin called Drift, which is an AI chatbot. And I know you were looking at some stats, Matt. I think, what was it? There was some huge percentage of sales for organizations that came in through that chatbot. What was your stat?
Yeah, similar to the Copilot shopping thing you showed earlier. I mean, if you have Drift on your on your website, it can automate the sales process for you. And we in fact we have clients who use Drift or use Drift at the time, who and Drift made up for like 70% of their online sales because people could just buy things directly through the AI agent that popped up on the website. Which I mean, that's great. That's a
Yeah.
huge productivity increase for your organization, and it streamlines a lot of your sales process.
So
But
in
that
order
also
to do
means,
that, yeah,
yeah,
so
it
that
to
means
do
that
that,
the Drift plugin had permissions to access the Salesforce interface and to write
right.
stuff and to read stuff. So what happened was that SalesLoft got hacked. In fact, their GitHub repository got hacked. Again, one of the reasons I love this case study is because it's so representative of many different things that we're seeing coming together this year. So those source code repositories that get hacked, they had coded tokens, hard coded OAuth access tokens. And the criminals were able to steal API keys and OAuth access tokens. And they used those to generate OAuth tokens in order to gain access to Salesforce. And from there, they were able to suck out information from different customer accounts. So again, you see that hard-coded, not passwords, but keys now in this case, or tokens that are being stolen. You see the targeting of source code, and then you see that identity abuse coming into it as well. And in
We should
that
probably point out
process,
too that when it
yeah.
was all said and done, it was over 700 organizations that were impacted by this.
Oh my goodness, the early estimates were like 22. But that's another thing that makes this so representative of modern supply chain incidents. We saw the same thing in Move It, where there was a small group that originally came out, and then over the next year, we saw little drips of news about a new company that announced they were hacked and a new company that announced they were hacked. And these are not any companies. These are like Zscaler, and I think another one might have been Palo Alto. I think that's correct. And, lots of different companies. And then when those companies are impacted, whose information are they holding? Well, in a lot of cases, it's their customers that may have been impacted and are then targeted and are at greater risk. And so we see this increase of systemic risk happening right now as well. So unfortunately, we're going to see this again and again and again. But because this was identity abuse, the activity appeared as legitimate traffic. And unless you were triggering on data exfiltration from Salesforce, which a lot of people weren't, this really went by unnoticed. What else, Matt? Do you want to cover embedded trust and what that means for modern
Yeah,
security?
yeah. So this brought up and this is a term that we see thrown about the industry when it comes down to these inter-system integrations like Drift and Salesforce and others. But they function on something that we refer to as embedded trust. And embedded trust basically is that concept that if I've already got an OAuth token that works in the account, I can just go ahead and authenticate with the account without further verification at that point, because the implication behind it means that I've already authenticated. I'm already approved to be here. I already have access to this data, so we don't need to go through that process again. Which again, for a ease of use and speed perspective, that's great. We want things like that to happen, but it means that if I can hijack that, I've got access to that stuff for a long time. Oftentimes these like OAuth tokens, I don't know of anyone that I've talked to who really keeps an inventory of what tokens they have authorized at any
Yeah,
given
no.
point in time.
Um,
Difficult to monitor. They're oftentimes, as Sherri mentioned before, really long lived. So, I mean, I could have access for 6 months on a system and never need to access using my username and password or something like that. So, yeah,
So
kind
I
of
know
rough.
we only have a few minutes left. We have a really cool AI generated voicemail that we want to play for you before the end. So we'll go
Yeah,
ahead
let's
and wrap
roll.
up our supply chain section. But you have probably noticed we're seeing bigger outages or outages that unexpectedly impact people in different geographic locations. And that's just, of course, when you have tech outages, it's different than our traditional and in some ways more predictable outages of physical infrastructure. Look at the difference between the Verizon outage that happened recently in 2026. That was, clustered in the east, but also pockets all over the country versus Colonial Pipeline, which you could reliably say impacted a certain geographic region. So a lot of times these can be really hard to predict, which means it can be hard to respond or plan our response. Also, sometimes we're also seeing a rise in the impacts of physical supply chain attacks. So there was a cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover earlier this year, and we expect to see more of these. It shut down their factory for more than 6 weeks. So this is cyber related, but it causes physical downtime for a manufacturing plant. And interestingly, this was a ransomware attack. I think this is, Matt, is this from CrowdStrike's report?
Yeah, this is CrowdStrike's ransomware report.
Yeah, they found that many organizations that rate themselves very well prepared, so in this case, public sector rates themselves 60% of the time as very well prepared, only 12% recovered in 24 hours. And that was true across many industries. Even in the best case scenario, financial services, 52% of them rated themselves as very well prepared. Only 38% were actually able to recover in 24 hours. And that's best case scenario. But the ripple effects here were huge. Hundreds of smaller manufacturers were temporarily idled because of the attack, the cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover. JLR had to provide upfront cash in order to keep those providers solvent. It had a $2.8 billion economic impact in the UK. So expect this year that we will likely see more of that. Attackers are targeting suppliers. We're seeing widespread ripple effects, and diversifying your supply chain is really key. So combining all of this together, AI is now integrated into attacks like this. And speaking of ransomware, AI is integrated into cyber extortion. So we're going to wrap up by talking about this and how ransomware has been impacting operations and also leveling up. Here's an example of AI-enhanced ransomware. Traditional ransomware will encrypt files and demand a ransom. AI-enhanced ransomware will use AI for things like reconnaissance. It'll generate targeted phishing emails, produce adaptive payloads. Matt, you were playing around with Worm GPT again. Tell us what we're looking at.
Yeah, so this is me asking Worm GPT to just go ahead and write ransomware for me. And it took, I think, 8 seconds, and we had functional ransomware code just in our hands, ready to go, that we could have deployed on a system at that point. And then we asked it to make us a worm that would automatically move between computers, and it augmented that same code to do that as well. So from a technical standpoint, if I'm a new hacker, I really don't have to be that talented as long as I have access to something like evil AI.
So tell us a little bit about prompt lock. This was kind of a failed experiment.
So prompt lock was this was AI developed ransomware. And this is one of the examples that we've actually seen out in the field. It does a lot of things that standard ransomware doesn't do. It again uses a language model to maintain the code for the ransomware, so whoever's developing it doesn't need to be a professional coder or have that much experience writing software. They can utilize the AI and basically vibe code most of it. But it also does things like adapt the payload based on whatever kind of environment that it's sitting in. It'll analyze what type of data it's looking at prior to actual deployment. And it becomes a lot harder to stop something when it basically has a mind of its own at that point. It's something that standard AV is just not going to be able to compete with.
Yeah, so the group motives are shifting. Microsoft is now reporting that over 50% of attacks with known motives are extortion driven. So that's why we're really focusing on ransomware right now and AI usage in ransomware, because this is a dominant threat that we're seeing. Also, attackers are leveraging AI to pressure victims. This was an example recently, I think this was in August, where the criminals say, all your files are encrypted. And this looks like a very traditional ransom note. But then they said, in addition to this, all artwork will be submitted to AI companies to be added to training data sets. What a threat, such a threat. And I was kind of like, ooh, well, with current lawsuits, maybe the artist could actually get some money out of that.
Maybe.
Speaking as an author myself, fingers crossed. Anthropic recently issued a warning. They had a whole report because they caught criminals that had been leveraging Claude Code. These criminals were targeting 17 or possibly more organizations, and they were leveraging Claude for reconnaissance, for harvesting credentials, and for penetrating networks. Here's a profit plan that Claude produced for the criminals. What we have, financial data. So can criminals now use it to analyze stolen data? You bet. And that increases the risk going forward and also retroactively. Have you ever lost a huge amount of data that is floating around the internet? It might have taken a lot of manual effort to review it in the past and for criminals to pick out what might be valuable to them. Now they can use AI to analyze it, to create data products, and to create extortion notes as well. And they're getting guidance. Here's another example where from Anthropic, where the criminal was selling ransomware that I think in this case it was AI generated. And it was the source for ransomware, a ransomware as a service kit. So again, this was an example of no code malware where really they just vibe coded and created that AI generated ransomware and then sold it on forums for $400 to $1,200.
For those not familiar with it, FUD stands for fully undetectable. So they're advertising that it can't be picked up by antivirus.
Fully undetectable. So AI is having a huge impact on cybercrime. Also worth noting that that it's impacting the quality of social engineering attacks as well. And I want to show you an example that one of our team members received. This is an AI-generated voicemail. So think about the voicemails that we've been receiving for the past several years where people are trying, criminals are trying to get your passwords and things like that. Listen to the voice and to the language.
Hey, this is David from the Business Verification Center. We're having an urgent issue with the keywords on your Google business listing and would like to get this fixed before the end of the day so it doesn't disrupt services. So please call us today at your earliest convenience, 866-728-7446. That's 866-728-7446. Now, our office closes at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today, so please call us back before then. But again, we're having an urgent issue with the keywords on your Google business listing and would like to get this fixed before the end of the day so it doesn't disrupt.
Yeah, so again, I like that cough even. So that's a fully AI generated voice, perfect English. It's clearly designed to target businesses. And this is the kind of thing that will actually fool people who receive it. It's just higher quality than we've seen in the past. It doesn't sound like that robo voice that we're used to. And we're going to be seeing real-time text-to-speech as well. So the good news is you can use AI to defend against this type of attacks as well. So understand where AI is used for attacks. This is the kill chain. And then we can also use it for detection purposes as well. And we need to because ransomware actions can complete in minutes, not days. And we need AI integrated into things like EDR tools and other response utilities in order to defend against this. So the bottom line, well, actually, here's a couple other things. We should probably mention threat hunting supported by machine learning, segmenting your network and micro segmentation in order to limit movement. These are important defensive measures that you can take to help limit that spread and slow things down. So bottom line, here's our top threats of 2026: AI visibility and control, identity exploitation, supply chain failures, and AI ransomware. What are the top ways we can protect against this? Centralize your AI deployment, your identities, so they're not siloed. Centralize your vendor management. Get visibility. I know it's boring, but it's effective. Inventory your AI tools, your identities, your vendors. Make sure you monitor for changes, maybe like annual oversight for important priority vendors. Go through those lists of accounts. Restrict and govern your AI usage, your accounts and identities, your vendors, and who you work with. Use the principle of least privilege throughout. I keep that in mind all the time for AI tools. If they don't need to access something, don't give them access, just like people. Your accounts, and then also your vendors. Again, if they don't need it, don't give them access. And then leverage AI for defense. Again, check out our podcast, Cyberside Chats. We will stick around a few minutes for questions. And thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sherri and Matt. How cool that you're offering that too. Definitely send us an email to info@lmgsecurity.com. We do have a few questions that came in, so I'm going to start with this one. How can small and medium-sized organizations with limited budgets and talent continue to integrate and benefit from AI efficiency without oversized SaaS or third-party risk or costly on-premise partitions?
Actually, I think this is one of the few areas where smaller organizations do have a leg up in some ways. It's just easier for you to understand how AI is being rolled out in a smaller organization. So take the time to talk to your folks. Make sure you're right now like nipping shadow AI IT in the bud. You're making sure everyone knows to centralize any AI related request, that you vet any usage of AI tools, and that you're tracking things. So the nice thing is we are at the beginning of this rollout, relatively speaking, and so you do have that opportunity. Matt, anything you want to add?
Couldn't have said it better myself, so I'm not even going to try.
Thanks.
The next question is more of a comment. Matt, fantastic images you created with AI. Just have to
Don't
say.
egg him on.
No, I'll take any motivation I can to create more of those.
You got it. I can't wait to see more in the future. Thank you so much, Sherri and Matt. Thank you for attending to all our attendees. Once again, my name is Natalie Bray with LMG Security, and we would like to thank everybody who attended today's session. Please take a moment to fill out the survey and let us know what you thought. The recorded video from this presentation will be made available to attendees, and we will send out a notification once it is live. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic 2026.